All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books welcomes former Washington University and St. Louis senior poetry fellow and acclaimed poet Paul Tran, who will discuss their highly anticipated new book, All the Flowers Kneeling. Tonight, Tran will be in conversation with poets Adrian Matejka and Dana Levin. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would love to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Paul, Dana, and Adrian, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com, and I will share the specific link for how you can get each poet's book. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, so thank you so much for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. And now, about the book that we are celebrating tonight, All the Flowers Kneeling. Alexander Chee, the author of How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, says, Paul Tran's debut collection of poems is indelible. This remarkable voice transforming itself as you read, eventually transforming you. Visceral and astonishing, Paul Tran's debut poetry collection, All the Flowers Kneeling, investigates intergenerational trauma, sexual violence, and U.S. imperialism in order to radically alter our understanding of freedom, power, and control. In poems of desire, gender, bodies, legacies, and imagined futures, Tran's poems elucidate the complex and harrowing processes of reckoning and recovery, enhanced by innovative poetic forms that mirror the nonlinear emotional and psychological experiences of trauma survivors. At once grand and intimate, commanding and deeply vulnerable, All the Flowers Kneeling revels in rediscovering and reconfiguring the self, and ultimately becomes an essential testament to the human capacity for resilience, endurance, and love. Dana Levin, who is joining us this evening, says, ravishing was the word that came to mind the first time I read Paul Tran's impressive debut collection. Ravishing as in gorgeous, ravishing as in carried away. To ravish, to drag off by force, to plunder. All the Flowers Kneeling is an extended investigation into what William James called traumata, thorns in the spirit, and Tran is our compassionate, exacting guide. By my own invention, I found a way. I'm no artifact. Between art and fact, I. Formally inventive, psychologically acute, unafraid to address the complex dynamics of relational trauma, both inherited and experienced. Tran's debut demonstrates the capacity of poetry to tell the truths which will set you free. And now, about our speakers this evening. Paul Tran received their BA in history from Brown University and MFA in poetry from Washington University in St. Louis, where they were the Chancellor's Graduate Fellow and Senior Poetry Fellow. They have been awarded a 2021 Fellowship in Literature from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Ruth, Lilly, and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation, and the Discovery Boston Review Poetry Prize. Currently a Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford University, Paul's work appears in the New Yorker, Poetry, and elsewhere. Adrian Matejka. Adrian's most recent collection of poetry is Somebody Else Sold the World. His other books are Map to the Stars, The Big Smoke, which was the winner of the Innisfield Wolf Book Award and a finalist for both the National Book Award and Pulitzer Prize. Mixology was selected for the National Poetry Series, and The Devil's Garden, Alice James Books, winner of the New York New England Award. Among Matejka's other honors are fellowships from the Academy of American Poets, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Lanham Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and United States Artists. He served as Poet Laureate of the state of Indiana in 2018-2019 and lives in Indianapolis, Indiana. Dana Levin is the author of 4 collections of poetry. Her debut in the Surgical Theater was selected by Louise Gluck for the American Poetry Review Honickman First Book Prize. The New Yorker called her third book, Sky Burial, utterly her own and utterly riveting. A Guggenheim and Rona Jaffe Fellow, Levin currently serves as distinguished writer-in-residence at Maryville University in St. Louis. And Dana does have a new book coming out very, very soon as well, and that is called Now Do You Know Where You Are? And we will be hosting Dana in conversation with Diane Seuss and Jane Huffman in April 19th. So you can join us then as well. And now, without further ado, would you all please help me in warmly welcoming our incredible guests for the evening? We have Paul Tran, Dana Levin, and Adrian Matejka. Hello!
Hi.
So we have a lot of people here joining us this evening. I am so thrilled that we are able to celebrate all 3 of you having connections to St. Louis, and that we are all joining together to celebrate Paul's incredible work.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, thank you, Shane. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
So we are going to start this evening with a reading from you, Paul?
Yes. So how it'll go is I'm going to read a poem, and then Dana going to read a poem, and then we're going to go back and forth. And my idea behind this is right before I got to St. Louis, I was in a workshop in Provincetown with Tina Chang, and Gabrielle Calvert-Cressy was also there. And one afternoon, Gabby says to me, "You're going to St. Louis, there's someone you just have to meet." And a week later, I'm bouncing down. Is this West Pine? What street is Brazier on? But I was going to meet you for lunch, and a lunch that would, I don't know, set me on a path to write the poems that I write. And when the, quarantine and shelter at home was beginning, Dana sent me this poem, Appointment, and just this line from it, "Since you're already dead, don't you just want to live?" That line propelled me into finishing this book. And so I want to go back and forth with her to show how our poems are in conversation. And then Uncle Adrian's going to step in and moderate our conversation, both of whom I would not be here without. So I'm just really glad. But we'll without further ado, we'll start. Lipstick Elegy. I climbed down to the beach facing the Pacific Ocean, where torrents of rain shore the sand. On the other side, my grandmother sleeps soundlessly in her bed, her aoyai of the whitest silk. My mother knew her mother died long before the telephone rang like bells announcing the last American helicopter leaving Saigon. Arrow shot back to its bow, long distance missile. I know she would fly home if she could. She works overtime instead. Curls her hair with hot rollers, rouges her cheeks like Gong Li in Raise the Red Lantern, and I'm her understudy, hiding in the doorway between her grief and mine. I apply her foundation to my face. I conceal the parts of me that she conceals, puckering my lips as if to kiss a man who would love me the way I wanted to be loved. And yes, I said all their bewitching names aloud. Twisted Rose, Fuchsia in Paris, Irreverence. I picked the lipstick she would least approve, wrapped a white towel around my waist, danced for hours in the kitchen, checking my reflection in a charred skillet. I laughed her laugh, the way my grandmother used to laugh when she was alive, when she taught me how to pray from the Kyudai, when I braided her hair in the unbearable heat, my tiny fingers weaving each silver strand into a fishtail, a French twist, each knot another child she never got to name. I'm sorry. Mother of my mother, immortal Buddha with 1,000 hands, chewing a fist of beetroot, your teeth black as dawn, no child in our family stays a child that their mother can love.
Paul, thank you so much for letting me come and celebrate your book and to celebrate you, and for letting me do this with you. I feel so weird. I just want you to read.
No. You have to tell us where we are.
No, I am bowing to you. You helped me so much with my own book. You really did. You showed up at various moments and just basically told me to follow my truth, and it really mattered. So I really, really, really thank you. I'm going to read this poem that's called For the Poets. And it, for the poets. To post, to share, to tag, to tweet, to have an audience for feats. Beowulf granted the glory of winning, Grendel driven under the fen banks fatally hurt, and the whole panoply of insulted Greeks, Agamemnon, the most grasping man alive. But who, if I cried out, would hear me amongst the angelic orders, is the common condition. If only 3 people like a tweet, does anything you offer sound in the forest? The history of civilization is replete with selfies, from pharaonic monoliths to portraits hanging in the Louvre. Lucius was here, scratched in Latin on Colosseum walls. Even the earliest handprints in the famous caves. We've always been Tommies. See me, feel me, touch me, heal me, climbing platforms to sachet the wealth. Not plunder now, but diamond contacts, accolades, and golden news, the flashy bling of being seen, such dread and hope and fear to hope that the work will live in some greater way in other minds, the confrontation with time and wanting to matter while inside it. I'm nobody. Who are you? Ms. D's morning cleanse or Uncle Walt's Jupiter tonic, I celebrate myself, which is to say I was heading into one last student reading at a college I was leaving to hear first poems about earth and sex and blood and stars, about the great forces and the dispossessed, parents, harm, and the boot of the state. Why, I thought, do any of us do any of this? And then verse came, such as it was. I was here. I lived in it. I died in it. This shit. Paradiso. I want to hear you read Incident Report.
Okay. Why? No, I'm kidding.
Oh yeah, I forgot that part.
Yeah.
It has such incantatory movement, which is amazing when you think about how it is working with the language of bureaucracy and the language of bureaucracy that attends having to make official traumatic events.
Yeah.
And the way that you orchestrate the bureaucraties,
yes,
and the slant ways that you come in and respond to those bureaucratistic, I'm coming up with all sorts of adjectives, just is amazing. And then also, like, it's a drum beat, and it drums us into like accompanying us on a march into the book. So I just think it's an amazing opening after Orchard of Memory.
Yes. Thank you, Dana. And I have to, I found a way to write this poem through Monica Yoon's poem, Study of Two Figures, Pacifica and Sado. And one of the reasons, Nate Marshall asked me on Thursday how, why I ordered the book the way I did. And one of the comments that reverberated in my mind as I was putting it together was from Mary Jo Bang. And she said, "Let the reader know you." And I thought, okay, this is going to be one of the poems that have to go in the front because it does initiate us in. Incident report. I had a form. The form said name of victim. The form named me. The form was a form of naming. Naming gave me form. The form said time of incident. Time could be measured. The incident could be defined. Both had a form. Both were a form of naming. The form said age. Age could be measured by time. Age could be defined by the incident. The incident occurred on the night before my 21st birthday. The time was night as night became night. The incident occurred in my room at the time. The time occurred to me after the incident. The form said race or ethnicity. Both were constructs. Both marked me. Both had a form. Both were a form of naming. Naming was marking. I marked the form. Asian bottom. For now, I was a construct looking for fun, no strings attached. I was unremarkable. The form said sex. The form listed my options. I had no option. I went along with the sex. The sex had a name. I won't say the name. Both marked me. The form said affiliation. Everything started out fine. The form said residence. I unlocked the door. I misread affiliation as affliction. The name entered. I misread residence as residual. The name kissed me. The form said alcohol or drugs used at the time of the incident. I was having a good time. The form said relationship with the assailant prior to incident. I did the thing I was good at. The form said type of coercion or force involved. The name hit me. The form said, please specify. The name choked me. The form said ability to consent was inhibited by the name pressed a white towel against my face. The form said, please specify. The towel smelled like sugar. Please specify. An ice cream truck drove by. Please. I heard the song. And now I have a poem for you. Okay. I think the orchestration, the ordering of a book is in itself a poem because so much intention and deliberation goes into it. On page 30 in your forthcoming book, Now Do We Know Where We Are? Now Do You Know What You Want? It starts with no. And then by the time we get to 49, there's a poem called Maybe. And I'm wondering if you will read Maybe for us. And my resonance with this poem is that it brings together two really important things, interiority and detail. And there's a kind of poem, sometimes we call it the dramatic monologue, but it is essentially that moment when the character on stage stops in the middle of time and almost turns out to the audience to speak this private utterance that is at once to themselves, but also to us. And that's the spirit I feel from a poem like Maybe, and from so many of your poems. And I think how it rescues me is that when I read poems like Maybe, when I read your poems, time does stop. And I feel like for a moment, I am talking to just one person. And I get to see their mind at work. And so will you read that for us, Maybe?
Yes, and you just illuminated this poem for me so much. So thank you. I've never thought about the dramatic monologue as something going on in my work, but you said it and I was like, whoa, and especially with this poem. So thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Maybe was about all that I could muster. On the question of whether this world, which I prefer to think of in the past tense, will flourish. Though the first of the last fires hasn't even started yet. Has it? Maybe the past tense because it implies survival. Back then plus but now, as if the future had already happened and you had made it out alive into midday living room peace, into 2 o'clock April light, you and a trailing coleus, survivor too, each leaf like a dab of dried blood on a scalloped pad of green. Sirens in the distance fading. Sirens in the distance above a wreck of ships perched where literature starts with war and lost men, heroes enticed to death by birds with the heads of girls, myth opening its blood-drenched wings. Maybe it wasn't future death hounding me, but past ends. Not popular apocalypse, but cracked Atlantis, golem Ozymandias, all the millions really dead in ruined capitals gone to ash and dream. Maybe it was my mother's scapegoat trauma blood keening. And suddenly I could see them, every empire that ever rose and fell, spread out on discs across an infinite plane called absolute now, like records spinning. All playing the same song, track by track. Ruin by better tech, ruin by hubris, ruin by appetite amok. And from this vantage, history looks like a choice. And I have to ask now, in the present tense, why choose the past as the future?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think your book also is sort of asking that question, right? Why choose the past as the future?
Yes.
And you realize that asking that question internally
Yes.
about your own individual life choices, and then asking that question collectively
Yes.
about the way we're living is absolutely related. There's
Yes.
an absolute through line. That's one of the things I absolutely love about your book is the willingness to do that bladed self-examination.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. And with your poem as well, to ask a question, period. Because often, so much, I don't want to just tell what I already know. We're trying to figure something new, something out. There's a vexation. The mind is wrestling with something, and the mind has to change its mind about something. I think maybe it wasn't future death, but past ends. That moment in your poem, I can feel the speaker discovering something in that moment.
yes, the discovery, right?
Yes.
Yes. Please read Bioluminescence.
Ooh, okay, God, yes.
And it's because of that sense of discovery, and because this poem has a true volta at the end, even though it's not a sonnet. And I love the journey. I love the journey that it takes me on and then turns it. Oh, yeah.
Yes. And I was on a plane watching Finding Nemo when when I had the idea for this poem. So on paper, bioluminescence. In my soul, my Finding Nemo poem. Bioluminescence. There's a dark so deep beneath the sea. The creatures beget their own light. This feat, this fact of adaptation, I could say, is beautiful. Though the creatures are hideous. Lantern fish, hatchet fish, viper fish, I, not unlike them, forfeited beauty to glimpse the world hidden by eternal darkness. I subsisted on falling matter, unaware from where or why matter fell, and on the weaker creatures, beguiled by my luminosity, my hideous face opening suddenly to take them in to a darkness darker and more eternal than this underworld under water. I swam and swam toward nowhere and nothing. I, after so much isolation, so much indifference, kept going, even if going meant only waiting, hovering in place, so far below, so far away from the rest of life, the terrestrial, made possible by and thereby dependent upon light. I did what I had to do. I stopped. I killed. I wanted to feel in my body at work, working to stay alive. I swam, I kept going, I waited, I found myself without meaning to, without contriving any meaning at the time, in the company of creatures who, hideous like me, had to be their own illumination, their own God, their own Genesis. Often we feuded. Often we fused like anglerfish, blood to blood, desire to desire. We were wild, bewildered, beautiful in our wilderness and wildness in the most extreme conditions. We proved that life can exist. I exist. I am my life, I thought, approaching at last the bottom of the sea. It wasn't the bottom. It wasn't the sea. Oh my God. Okay. Because, oh no, I had a mentor, when Rick Barrett came to town, and as our visiting Hearst professor, all the MFA students got to share with him 10 pages of work. And when I sat down with him, one of his first comments was, "Paul, you realize that in all of these poems, you're just talking to yourself by yourself. They don't. Where are you in the world? Why aren't you doing anything? Why aren't things happening?" And I had this moment of deep shame that, oh my God, maybe for the last, maybe at that point, 7 years, I have been living in my mind and wasn't registering the fact that, yes, my body did have to move through the world, did have to interact with others. The mind where I was alone was my safe place. And so you have this poem, How to Hold the Heavy Weight of Now, on page 47, where things are happening. People are speaking to each other, an action is taken, choices are made. And the poem is suggestive of its interiorities, it's suggestive of its concerns. And I think that's one of my current assignments, is to write poems that live in the world. And so will you share how to hold the heavy weight of now with
Sure.
us?
Yes. She said, "You just made this gesture with your body and opened her arms as if she could barely fit them around an enormous ball. Make that shape again," she said, and so I did. Now let it change, she said, and I did. Slowly closing the space between my arms, fingertips converging until they touched. I watched my hands turn together, align pinky side to pinky side. I watched my palms open, pushing gently forward, leading my body forward. I watched them let a bird go. I watched my hands make an offering.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to hear Endosymbiosis. It was the first poem of yours I ever read. It was the first poem of yours I ever saw. And I really love how all through the book, language is a method of embodiment and that's literal. Like words and bodies are the same. They merge, they separate, they hurt each other,
Yeah.
and they affect each other. And I love that. I love the way that is a through line in this book. And this poem was the first time I saw it in play.
Oh my gosh. I remember getting your email when you saw it. I was like, I don't know, it made me so happy because like in my mind there's a huge dinner table where all of my poetry aunties sit, and when you blessed that poem, that was a really special moment for me. Here we go. And then after this, our conversation. Yes, okay. Endosymbiosis. It wasn't him, but what he did that lived on inside me. I had to learn that. I had to cleave action from figure, the verb do from the noun doll. I had to imagine the double L not as two walls closing in, two bodies side by side in a twin bed, two mirrors facing each other, two tally marks. For the first and second time, I was but a road through hell, this near contraction of he and will, where the punctuation could so easily be missed. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Everyone should read this book.
Oh my gosh, and pre-order Dana's.
Oh, thank you. But no, I mean, even just looking at your table of contents is an encounter with elegance. I mean, it is a very elegantly constructed book that is holding so much of our brutal world and, the wish to find the light in it.
Yes.
It's just, thank you for it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Adrian, come join us.
I was actually thinking that I would rather just hang back and hear you read some more. Those poems are so beautiful.
When I
Thank you.
talk about that dining table with the aunties, the uncles are there too. So you have to.
Adrian, maybe we can get Paul to read a poem, before we close.
I think that would be a good idea. Like, no, wait, Paul, I'm gonna put this on you. I want you to pick the poem that you want to shut this whole thing down with when we get finished talking. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I know that this is going to be a breeze because any one of the poems in this beautiful book could shut it down. And Dana, I was so happy to hear this new work. I can't wait for the book to come out. Now do you know where you are? It's April 19th.
April 19th. Yep. Right here. Diane Seuss and Jane Huffman. I'm so excited. And it's my pub day. So, and I'm reading with Paul here in St. Louis in person. So why don't you come down, Adrian, on April 23rd?
April 20th. I'm writing it down on my notes page.
Yeah, St. Louis Center. We're having
Washington Street.
Yeah.
I would love that. I need to come home anyway. You know what I mean? I need to come back to St. Louis. It's been too long. I was just writing notes and words the entire time you were reading that. I kept coming back to, I think you used the phrase incantatory, the word incantatory, Dana. And I love that as an adjective for Paul's work. I think it also applies to your work too, particularly the poems that you read tonight. You have such great music. And so I wanted to maybe start there. And can you talk a little bit about what musicality is for both of you and how this works and it informs the choices you make?
Do you want me to start?
Okay, sorry. So, okay, yeah.
Well, oh my God, it's everything, right?
Yeah.
It's everything. It's weird though, because I usually start with images and I don't really think much about music, but I just let it come in. I will say, I'll just tell you one little story. I've been thinking a lot about my mom and I've been writing about her. And we used to play this weird game in the car where if she was driving me around, like, this is where I'm like strapped into like a baby seat, but I have language. And she would go, Dana, Dana, Dana. And I'd go, yeah, yeah. But she'd raise her voice and lower her voice and do it really fast and do it really slow. And I would meet whatever she was doing. So if she did it really loud, I shouted. And if she did it really slow, I really quietly, I whispered. And I have been really thinking about that as like, that was my real first encounter with poetry. You know, and I don't even really know it. I don't know if you had experiences like that, Paul, when you were little.
I mean, absolutely. And it shames me a little bit because for so long, Vietnamese was tied up to my relationship with my family. And whatever vexation happened, you know, in my relationship to my family, it wasn't until I was a young adult where I was able to speak Vietnamese with other people, particularly my sister poet Hugh Minh Nguyen, and have a completely different relationship to the language that is now full of like love, teasing, like it's helped me go back to my memories of childhood, where that was the only language I knew and experienced it different. But Adrian, towards your question, I think like many poets, I came to the page because I thought no one was listening. And I thought, well, the page has to listen to me. And that has a double-edged sword to it. The double edge is that so many of my ideas for poems begin as direct utterance. And I had to learn how to represent it in image or represent it in music. And I remember my first semester at WashU, Aaron Coleman read At Pegasus by Terrence Hayes to me. And was just like, stop, like, don't, you know, like you already know the content. Just listen to the words. And I don't know if it's because, you know, snow was coming down and like, you know, I just closed my eyes and something happened when the word fire and gyre happened. And I was like, I think this is the moment when I've moved beyond the narcissistic agenda of telling my own story, or, you know, for better or worse, like necessary, but, you know, it could, into actually being a lover of language and realizing what language could do, how language can make me feel. And so in my poems, I think music is another way of representing interiority, where the sounds start piling up, where there's a lot of like wordplay and cheekiness. That's the speaker trying to claw their way out, trying to triumph, being a little, you know, in love with their own swagger. Then when the music quiets down, when it's plain, I think that's a different kind of intimacy that I'm trying to represent.
Yeah, it's so beautifully said. I was thinking about this quote from Stevie Wonder. He said that music is essentially memory. I think about that as it relates to the work that both of you shared. How it is not only distilling, but it's also excavating. Right, both of these actions are happening at the same time in these poems. Now, you mentioned Rick Barot as one of the people who'd helped you break free of this perspective. Dana, were there people who? And you mentioned each other as influences in this, you know, and I'm always fascinated with the genealogy of poets and their work. Maybe could both of you talk a little bit about other people who might have informed the work in these new projects?
Wow. Well, I mean, we share a mentor in Louise Glick, and we both have come under that gaze, which is exacting and generous. Man, she will always tell you the truth. Always. And sometimes that truth is just like, oh my God, yes. And other times that truth is like, oh my God. everything in between. But I don't know if you would agree with this, Paul, but I feel like my own experience of her primarily has been having a gift as a responsibility to the gift.
Yeah.
So you cannot the worst thing in the world to do is to say, well, it's okay, I'm fine, or I settle, and then to have the courage of your formal convictions,
Mm.
even if they seem weird, or like if you're having your own problem with it, to have the courage of your formal convictions. I mean, what's been your experience of her?
I mean, very similar. And like, I want to say that it reminds me of how frightening it is to be seen.
Very much.
And I thought, it's so funny because, again, I came to poetry like, oh, I want to be heard. I want to tell the truth. Did I really want to be heard and understood? Did I really know what the truth was? And so it is, I could not have made it here without mentors who said, we refuse to let you be in denial to yourself. We refuse to let you deflect away from your concerns. We refuse to let you use the arena of poetic devices to decorate language or to use language decoratively and not in the service of your own betterment and changing your own life. And so that's been Carl Phillips, Mary Jo Bang, Dana, Adrian, like Rick Barrett, like I think every step of the way, no matter how seducing it might seem to give up on myself, I've relied on folks like y'all to remind me to take responsibility of the gift. And so right now at Stanford, it's Louise, it's Patrick Phillips, Paisley Rectal. Next semester, I get to work with Avan Jordan for the first time. But in these deeply spiritual ways, because I find that, yeah, we're talking about the poem on the page, but what you are all helping me correct is my imagination and how I get to move through the world and write better poems by first trying to live a better life.
Yeah, because it's soul work, right? I mean, if you let it.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, even as you were saying that, I was thinking about the obligations, right? The obligations we have. I think they talked about the gift to the self, to the art that we're trying to create, and there's some kind of, I mean, do you think we have an obligation to I hate to use the word honesty, but when you said that Louise will just tell you how it is, in some ways, maybe that's the thing that poetry allows me to do. I don't know if that works the same way with you. It's the closest I get to telling the truth, because I can't run from it in that same way when it's on the page.
Yes.
And so I love this idea of having, we are expected to give back to this thing that gives us so much as well. But then there's the problem comes when we're working and kind of run into those spaces that we're not ready to access, or not capable of articulating yet in one way or another in a legible way. And then that becomes, there's a need for invention. Right.
Yes.
And so I was hoping that maybe both of you might be able to talk a little bit about invention and the books that you've written.
Well, I mean, I love that you said that, because I was thinking about poetry being a vehicle for telling hard truths, because you can also camouflage and misdirect and hide, and poetry is just this kind of wild technology for revealing while hiding in this kind of bizarro way. Poetry also, I just find that maybe the two of you also find this, certain subject matter is insistent, even if you don't want to go there. And Paul, I mean, did you have, this material is so intense and so deep. I mean, what was that experience like?
Very much as you described. And it actually took me a while to figure out that why I love poetry is because I get to tell the truth on my own terms. It's not like prose, where sentences are driven by logic and by a sense of time or progress in argument. Like, I don't know, I think of the Robert Hayden, Those Winter Sundays, And for a long time, it was the final 2 lines that captured my attention. What did I know? What did I know? But then there's that sentence right before, the longest sentence of the poem, 6 lines, the only sentence to be broken across 2 stanzas. And it's like, when the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had polished my good who'd driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. I didn't realize that sentence is so syntactically complex. And it opens with the father's kindness when the rooms were warm. Then it would lead to the chronic anger. And it responded to chronic anger with child indifference, which is itself a kind of violence reciprocated back, or a response to violence. And it completed its utterance with who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes, father's kindness again. So kindness, violence, violence, kindness, a kind of chiastic syntactic construction. And I was like, that's how survivors talk about their abusers. And the poem never had to say it. It said it through syntax. And someone who knew or who would know the experience, who has that sensibility, could tap into it. I can't confirm if that is actually the relationship between Hayden and his father, or the speaker and the father, but it's there in the text.
In the form, right?
Yeah.
In the form of the text.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that is what poetry can be. I can say the truth, even if I, know that I will be censored for it or punished for it, but I can say it through form, through all these other devices at my disposal. And it made me then less afraid to say it. Yeah.
Hey, so I think Paul should maybe leave us with a poem, because it seems like we have several comments and a question, and we should leave time for the audience to interact with Paul. And
yeah, actually, I was going to say this would be a good time to answer one of the questions that was in there too.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because the question was about what were the most difficult poems to write in the book, and so you were starting to talk about that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, 2 easy answers, because of just their ambition and their length, is I have a sonnet crown called Shahirazad. And it's one of the first stories my mom ever told me as a kid. And of course, I took it for granted, and then later on found importance in it, which, I tell her all the time so that she knows that, she did a great job. But it's split in half. So the first 7 sections are in the first section. The last 7 sections are in the last section. And just one, for those who don't know, the story of Shahirazad is that in the Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights, there's this malicious king who executes a new beloved every morning. And to spare her sister, her younger sister, Shahirazad volunteers to be wedded and to be executed. But as she enters his bedchamber, she begins telling him a story. And then she pauses and starts another story. And this goes on until morning, when she ends on a cliffhanger, and the king asks, well, what happens next? And she's like, well, I'm about to get ready to die. So unfortunately for you, you won't know. And so he invites her back the next night to continue this story. And she outsmarts him and continues telling story after story, from which we get Aladdin, Tristan and Isolde, all of these tales that we now know from this storyteller. And after 1001 Nights, she evades her death. She becomes the queen of this kingdom. She teaches this man what love is, and not simply what love is, how to love her. And I didn't know the resonance of that. And I as a child couldn't appreciate that out of this scenario, we get narrative devices like the frame story or the cliffhanger. And one day I woke up and thought, well, what if the sonnet crown was a sonnet crown inside a sonnet crown? To mirror Shahirazad's journey. And then I laughed at myself and said, girl, you can't even finish a sonnet crown. How are you going to write a sonnet crown in a crown? But then I was teaching this incredible summer class at Wash U, and it was an intensive 3 weeks. We were writing like 2 poems a week. And then one day from like 10 in the morning to 10 at night, I sit and I write this entire sequence. And so that was difficult. But one especially difficult poem was this poem called I See Not Stars, but Their Light Reaching Across the Distance Between Us, which is an invented form that I was assigned in Carl's prosody class to create a poetic form that would mirror our life experience in some way. And so I wanted to reimagine the sonnet, sonnet crown, and the sestina in a new form that better enacted the non-linear experience of trauma survivors. And so that poem is in 13 sections. It's at the heart of the book. I think I'll read 2 sections to close, but it was the most difficult because I found that in a lot of received forms out of our Western tradition, the focus is on the end of the line. Rhyme occurs at the end of the line. The collapsing, repeating words of a sestina is happening at the end of a line. And so as poets, we start with the unknown and we write towards a rather known end. I'm gonna have to rhyme this word somehow, right? This word's gonna have to repeat at some time. That wasn't my experience. I started with the known, whether it was the childhood poverty that I had to lift me and my mom out of, whether it was the abuse that I had to overcome to go to college, whether, whatever, towards an unknown, the future. And so this invented form repeats its words at the beginning of the line, and we move towards an unknown end. And it was difficult to write because it was difficult to live that way, to let the unknown be unknown. And so that's my wrap up for this question.
No, so good. And also you answered the question about invention because you used, was it formal invention?
Yeah, well, it's just, I think for so long poets, we have to just, we're charged with proving mastery. And there have been categories of people who've been excluded from being human, from being inventors. And so one of my ambitions, as lofty as might have been, was to show again that poets from marginalized backgrounds, poets who have been struck out of the historical record, we are inventors and we contribute to the field.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share a couple of comments from the audience because there were just so many lovely things that have been said about everyone involved. But I'll share Michael's first. This conversation is so rich. First, the conversation through poems, and now with Adrian bringing questions to deepen it even further. What a gift. And Ruth says, bioluminescence. The flame itself has no shadow, but as if the source of light, it illuminates the dark and enables others to cast shadows and to leave impressions. You mentioned earlier, Paul, that the order of poems in a book is a form of poetry itself. And I'm wondering what the order of poems, what you feel like maybe we're trying to, and maybe this is like something that each reader can take a little bit from personally, but I wonder if you had a specific goal in mind for the order of poems, like whether it be recovery from trauma or speaking of something like, I don't know.
Yeah, Chee, I feel like with a story like mine, there's the desire or the expectation for a triumphant ending. Like, you overcame it, like the end. But that has not been my life. There's been mistakes that I make over and over, choices that I regret, ways of thinking that continue to harm me. And so I wanted to represent not simply a hero's journey with a nice happy ending, but a journey of effort, of reckoning again and again. And I was inspired by the Greek rhetorical figure of chiasmus, and so that's the double cage in rhyme. It might look like A, B, B, A. So the outside cage of A, the inner cage of B, and that not so much the speaker ends where they began, but we enter through the orchard. There's a poem called The Cave that sends the reader into history. There's another poem called The Cave that sends the reader out of history into the present, where they finally, at the end of the book, they encounter the orchard again. And we move from the orchard of knowing, which is at the start of the book, to the orchard of unknowing, which is at the end. Even just those two poems, one is in complete sentences while the other is in fragments. And we move from one poem called The Cave, which follows a figure entering, a cave for the first time like 15,000 years ago, only to see that others had been there before. The others had left, art on the wall. And by the time we exit that cave, that figure and the reader is conscripted to leave their handprint on the wall to also say that they had been there. And so literally I'm asking the reader to go on this journey with me, to feel and think and experience with me. Every decision for this book was made with intention, down to the font choice of Electra and and the French flaps, because French colonialism. This is how we get something back. Yes. Just a little promo for the baby. She's dressed well.
Such a beautiful book, Paul.
Yeah.
Really.
I don't see any other questions from the audience. Any other topics of conversation from Dana or Adrian to send us off, or into the poems?
I think we should hear the poems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Paul.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here. And I'm so to this book.
This book.
Thank you, Shane, for having us. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Dana. It's you both made this possible in so many ways. I owe you a great debt. I'm going to read the last sections of the invented form. And so the first section is going to end, invention, I found a way, I'm no artifact, between art and fact, I. And each line in the final section begins with the words, invention, I found a way, I'm no artifact, between art and fact, I. Okay. Bloomed after decades dormant, after dryness and heat, after the rainfall blurred the atmosphere, the desert, a sea of gold and pink and purple, let sprout. Let butterflies and bees and hummingbirds let grow this desert gold, this gravel ghost, this golden evening primrose, this photograph of notched leaf Visalia rising 3 feet high from a bed of stone. Show the way. Show salt flats and sand dunes and rock. Show faith that a moment can be a monument, that the monumental can be this momentary human. Was I who came back and still took for granted the abundance nature made known to me. Princess plume, magnificent lupine, my suffering is that I try to make my suffering beautiful. And I'm no beauty. I'm told that nature's an allegory in which the ego hides like the dark throat shooting star. Cruelest was I, who crossed Death Valley to the valley of life. By my own invention, I found a way. I'm no artifact. Between art and fact, I. Invention slid into my mind tonight, like a formal feeling, just as I slid into my bodysuit. It was August again. Found in my purse was a boarding pass, and there I was, looking through a telescope in the fog-covered field as someone drew closer, Way in the distance, the stars appeared, still fixed, still luminous. I'm going to be far from my pain one day. I'm going to no longer feel that pain, but something new and just as merciless. Artifact of the past, artifice of the future. There I was, in the tall grass, between the choices I'd made and the choices I was given. The fog's ambivalent art made it so that I saw only what was in front of me. And no matter what drew closer, the stranger in the field or the field itself, fact or fiction, my need or my desire, I had to focus on what I could see. I see not stars, but their light reaching across the distance between us. Thank you so much.
I want to, first off, Paul, congratulations so much on this book. It is incredible to have this book in this world. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. Dana, Adrian, the audience, the wonderful audience.
Thanks, Left Bank. Thanks, everybody.
So good to see you in your little squares.
And yeah, Paul, if you want to stick around, I would. You can see all of the comments that people shared. They're just beautiful and incredible. But I want to wish everyone to have a fantastic rest of your evening. Thank you for joining us. And if we don't see you again before we will hopefully see you on April 19th when we do this again with Dana to celebrate Dana's new book. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.